Have you ever been completely alone in a massive, creaky house and felt like someone was watching you? Well, that is exactly the nightmare I lived through a few years ago. Before you hear the rest of this chilling story, do me a quick favor. If you love scary stories, smash that like button right now. Back then, I was still living with my parents during my final years of high school before heading off to college. My parents decided to buy a new house, but it wasn't just any normal house. It was located far away from the busy city and deep in the woods, looking like a giant mansion to me. It was honestly way too big for just the three of us, but since we often had relatives visiting, my parents used that as an excuse to buy it. During this one specific week, my parents had to fly out to visit the rest of our family. They asked me to come along, but I really didn't want to miss school and deal with the stress of catching up on homework, so I chose to stay behind and watch the house. But here's the crazy part. I quickly realized how much I hated being alone in that place. The house was just too huge, filled with endless long hallways and empty guest rooms that made me feel incredibly uneasy. On top of that, the house was over 100 years old, which added a really creepy vibe to the whole place. Even though I was old enough to try to ignore the fear, it never truly went away. For the first 2 days of being home alone, everything went smoothly. I went to class, hung out with my friends, and just relaxed at home. But on the third day, things took a weird turn. I went to school and grabbed some food with my friends afterward, meaning I didn't get back to the house until around 6 or 7 in the evening. It was already pitch black outside, and I was completely exhausted, wanting nothing more than to just lie down in bed. I walked inside, dropped my backpack by the front door, and headed up to the second floor. Now, this is where it gets interesting. As soon as I reached the top of the stairs and looked down the long hallway, I instantly noticed something was wrong. One of the spare bedroom doors was wide open. I didn't immediately panic and think a criminal was inside, but it definitely brought back that familiar, creepy feeling. I walked down the hall and peered into the empty room. It only had a bed and a few random pieces of furniture, and nothing seemed out of place. I shut the door, but I still felt deeply unsettled. You see, my bedroom was at the very end of this long hallway, meaning I walked past these doors multiple times every single day. There was no way I wouldn't have noticed that door being open earlier. I always made sure all the doors in this giant house were closed, because passing by dark, open rooms always gave me the chills. Before settling down, I decided to do a quick walkthrough of the house. I didn't check every single corner, but I looked around for any obvious signs of trouble. Finding nothing, I tried to convince myself that I had simply missed the open door earlier, or maybe the breeze had pushed it open if it wasn't latched properly. I went into my bedroom and turned on the television, hoping to distract myself. Sadly, it didn't do much to calm my nerves. I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that I was completely isolated in this giant mansion, with absolutely no clue what might be happening in the other rooms. It wasn't that I knew something was wrong, but rather the terrifying mystery of the unknown that kept me on edge. Nearly an hour passed before my stomach started growling for dinner. I finally left my room, walked down the hallway, and headed to the ground floor. Another creepy thing about living in a house this size was that we never kept all the lights on, meaning I was constantly walking past pitch-black rooms and eerie shadows. As I stood in the kitchen, my eyes kept darting toward the distant living room. Every single time I glanced over, the space was pitch black and completely empty. I honestly felt like I was losing my mind. The isolation was clearly playing tricks on my brain, and I really didn't want to surrender to these silly, irrational fears. I kept telling myself that I was getting worked up over absolutely nothing, so I forced myself to ignore it. I finished cooking my food and headed back upstairs, but the second I stepped onto the second floor landing, a cold shiver ran straight down my spine. That damn door was wide open again. I stood there completely frozen, staring down the dark corridor for what felt like a whole minute. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how this was even possible. Right then, I actually started wondering if the house was haunted. I had never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, but that was before I moved into a creepy, century-old mansion buried in the deep woods. By the way, if you are enjoying this creepy story so far, do me a huge favor and smash that like button right now. I crept quietly back toward the spare bedroom, pushing the door open a bit further to peer inside. The old hinges gave a soft creak. Everything inside looked exactly the same as before. I stepped into the room and searched for any tiny clues, like a muddy footprint or a misplaced object, but there was absolutely nothing. Feeling more anxious than ever, I backed out, went into my own bedroom, and made sure to lock the door behind me. I decided to send a quick text to my parents. I tried to sound casual so they wouldn't worry, just asking if they had ever noticed the spare room door opening on its own, or if the latch was broken. They replied almost instantly, telling me they had never noticed anything weird and didn't really know what I was talking about. I told them not to worry and said it was probably just the draft. But deep down, I was getting more terrified by the second. It was like my body's natural survival instinct was screaming that something was terribly wrong. But here is where it gets really interesting. I was sitting on my bed, eating my dinner with the television playing in the background. About 10 minutes passed, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps walking down the hallway. If you want to see how this nightmare ends, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming videos. I grabbed the TV remote and hit pause as fast as I could, just in time to hear a heavy thud right outside my bedroom door. My heart started pounding against my ribs. There was a long, agonizing silence. Not a single sound echoed through the house, which made me too terrified to even breathe. Then, whoever was standing on the other side of the wood began to knock. It wasn't a loud bang, but a soft, slow tapping, like they were teasing me. I couldn't believe this was actually happening to me. The situation felt so unreal that my brain just short-circuited. After that initial tapping, there was nothing but dead silence for another minute. Finally, I gathered enough courage to yell out, "Who is out there? I've already called the police." It was a total bluff, but I hoped it would scare them away. I knew I needed to dial 911, but the police station was far away, and it would take them at least 15 minutes to reach this remote house. I was completely on my own. The only answer to my threat was 3 more slow, calm knocks on the wood. That was the breaking point. I dialed the emergency number. If this intruder was just going to wait outside my door, I needed help immediately. I got connected to the operator and started giving them my address. The dispatcher asked what the intruder was doing at that exact moment. Just as I started explaining that they were standing right outside my bedroom, a horrible, loud, scratching sound echoed through the room. It sounded like someone was dragging a sharp object down the wooden door. I began to panic, begging the operator to send help faster. Then, the doorknob started jiggling back and forth violently, and I thanked God that I had remembered to lock it. Suddenly, the noise stopped. A minute crawled by, and then 3 soft taps hit the wood before everything went completely silent again. I stood there shivering for another 10 minutes, waiting for the police to show up. By the time they arrived, whoever was out there had vanished. The only proof they were ever there was a deep, nasty scratch carved right into the door, definitely made by a sharp knife. The officers searched the place to figure out how the intruder got in, but honestly, it was almost impossible to tell because the house had so many doors and windows. Plus, most of the window locks were super old and barely worked anyway. In the end, the police found absolutely no clues. My parents caught the very first flight home, and even though nothing else happened, I never felt safe in that house again. Every dark corner and empty room felt incredibly creepy, and the thick woods surrounding the property started to feel totally menacing. Just a week later, I was looking out the window and could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the trees, but it was pitch black, so it might have just been my mind playing tricks on me. If you are enjoying this story so far, please smash that like button and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Fortunately, I don't live in that creepy house anymore, and my parents actually sold it just a few months ago. We will probably never know who was stalking us or what they wanted. But here is where the next strange thing happened. It was a totally normal Friday night. I was living by myself in a tiny suburban house, but my job was an hour away in the city. Since the weekend was finally here, my only plan was to relax, play video games, watch YouTube, and sleep in late. After getting home from work, I took a quick shower, turned on my PlayStation, and gamed for a few hours. I even drank a couple of beers to unwind. Everything was going great, and I decided the night would be perfect if I ordered a fresh pizza. I used a local pizza place's app to order, then laid down on the couch and put on some YouTube videos while I waited. Now, this is where it gets interesting. After 45 minutes, I realized my food still hadn't arrived, and I hadn't received any updates. I pulled out my phone to check the order status. The app showed a delay, showing a generic message that said something like, "We are sorry for the delay. Your order will be on the way shortly." I wasn't too worried since I wanted to stay up late anyway, but I could feel myself getting really sleepy. I guess I was way more exhausted than I realized. Over the next 15 minutes, with the TV still playing in the background, I drifted off to sleep. You won't believe what woke me up. The doorbell started ringing over and over again, loud and fast. I jumped off the couch, realizing the pizza guy must be outside. I had no clue how long I slept or how long he had been standing there waiting. I rushed to the front door and unlocked it. I was still half asleep and foggy, and the beers I drank earlier made me feel even more out of it. When I swung the door open, a man was standing on my front porch. "Sorry about that. I hope you haven't been waiting out here long. What do I owe you?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. The guy just stared at me, looking completely confused. So I asked again, "For the food, how much is it?" As soon as the words left my mouth, my stomach dropped. I realized this guy wasn't holding any pizza boxes. He wasn't holding anything at all. He also wasn't wearing a delivery uniform. Instead, he had on dark jeans and a gray hoodie pulled up over his head, with both of his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He stood there in silence for a really uncomfortable amount of time, as if he was trying to figure out what to say next. Before you hear what he did, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss our next scary story. Finally, a creepy smile spread across his face, and he told me not to worry because the pizzas were still on the way. After he said that, he just stopped talking. He stood there, staring right at me as if his response made total sense. Even though I was a bit tipsy and completely exhausted, I could tell something was seriously wrong with this picture. I mean, think about it. Why would he be standing on my porch if the food was still on the way? But I was too tired to argue, so I just nodded, said okay, and closed the door after another long, awkward silence. I rubbed my eyes and tried to clear my head. Why did that feel so incredibly creepy? I knew my brain wasn't working at 100%, which actually made me doubt myself. I figured I was just overthinking things because of the alcohol. So, I put on a new video, leaned back on the couch, and closed my eyes, falling right back to sleep. But here's the crazy part. I woke up again to a strange clicking sound. I couldn't tell what it was, but I knew I had only been asleep for a few minutes because the same video was still playing. I sat up straight, holding my breath, waiting to hear a knock or the doorbell ring. Nothing happened. It was completely silent. Still confused by that clicking noise, I finally decided to grab my phone and check the delivery app to see what was going on with my food. But the moment I looked at my screen, my heart dropped. It was 4 a.m. I had ordered that pizza at 11 p.m., and the shop closed at 1 a.m. Now, this is where it gets really terrifying. If you want to make sure you never miss another chilling story like this one, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon right now. I opened the app and saw that my order had been delayed for an hour before the restaurant canceled it completely. My stomach churned. If the pizza was canceled hours ago, who on earth was that man standing at my door just minutes earlier? I got up from the couch, walked down the dark hallway, and looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. I reached down to unlock the door so I could look outside, but my hand froze. The deadbolt was already unlocked. I must have been so out of it that I forgot to lock it after closing the door on that stranger. I opened it up and scanned the street, but the neighborhood was dead silent and completely empty. I was way too tired and confused to deal with this. I pulled the door shut, and that's when it hit me. The sound of the door clicking into the frame was the exact noise that had woken me up. My blood ran cold. In that second, I replayed the whole conversation in my head. The guy wasn't a delivery driver at all. He only pretended to be one because I was the one who brought up the pizza first. He just went along with my mistake. Why would a random stranger lie about that? I looked back into the pitch-black hallway of my house. Every single instinct told me to get out immediately. I crept back to the living room to grab my phone off the couch. Just as my fingers touched it, I heard a loud rustle coming from the back room. I completely panicked. I grabbed the phone, bolted down the hallway, and ran out the front door as fast as I could. I didn't stop running until I reached the end of the street, where I quickly dialed 911. The police arrived in just a few minutes, but it wasn't fast enough. The intruder was already gone. I told the officers everything I could remember, describing his face, his clothes, and the weird things he said. But without any real leads, the investigation has stalled. I still lie awake at night, wondering what his actual plan was. Was he looking for an empty house to rob, or was he planning something much worse? Which part of this story sent chills down your spine? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Looking back at that night, I think he could easily tell I was exhausted, out of it, and not really paying attention. He probably saw that as his perfect chance to take advantage of me. Honestly, I'm willing to bet he stood right outside my door, listening closely to hear if I actually locked it, and then just waited a few minutes for me to drift back to sleep. If I hadn't woken up right then and realized what was happening, things could have gone in a completely different, terrifying direction. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Let's jump back to the middle of 2019, when I first moved to a new town for a job. I was pretty broke at the time, so I had to rent the cheapest, smallest place I could find. It was a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a small building with only 4 units in total. The place was super old, run down, and located in a pretty rough part of town. For the first 3 months, I was actually the only person living in the entire building. All the other 3 apartments were completely empty. It felt pretty creepy being there all alone, but I told myself it was just temporary until I saved up some money, so I decided to stick it out. But here's the crazy part. Work ended up being way more stressful than I ever expected. I was working constant overtime and dealing with a really toxic environment, so I barely spent any time at home other than to sleep. One night, I finally got home around 8 p.m., feeling absolutely exhausted. I kicked off my shoes and started walking down the hallway to my bedroom when, suddenly, there was a loud knock on my front door. I jumped out of my skin because it was so unexpected, especially since I hadn't seen anyone outside when I walked in. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button right now. I stumbled back to the door and peered through the peephole, but I couldn't see a thing. The glass was either totally scratched up or covered in dirt. Having no idea who it could be, I slowly opened the door. Standing right there, almost touching the door frame, was a guy in his late 40s or early 50s. He had messy dark hair, thick stubble, and these incredibly intense, creepy eyes that immediately made me feel uneasy. I asked him how I could help him. He stared at me, his eyes widening even more, and after a weird pause, he asked if I lived there. It felt like a really strange question, but without thinking, I just said yes. He gave me this wide, unsettling grin and told me he was moving into the apartment right next door and wanted to say hello. Then, he gave me a really awkward wave, walked over to the next unit, and went inside. But wait, here's the kicker. He never actually told me his name or introduced himself at all. I figured he was just a weird guy, but I didn't think much of it. If anything, I felt a little better knowing I wasn't the only person living in this empty building anymore. Before we get to the next creepy encounter, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next video. That night, I ate dinner and went straight to sleep because I had another brutal workday ahead of me. The next evening, I got home around the exact same time. But as I walked up the outdoor stairs to my place, I noticed the blinds in the apartment next door move. It was the unit the strange man claimed he had just moved into. The way the blinds swayed made it obvious that someone had just been peering out at me. I rushed up the rest of the steps and hurried inside, feeling incredibly uncomfortable. I tried to brush it off and tell myself I was just being paranoid. But then, I had only been inside for about 30 seconds when another knock echoed from the front door. I walked back over and, out of habit, looked through the useless peephole again, remembering too late that I couldn't see through it. So, knowing exactly who was standing on the other side, I opened the door. There stood the exact same man, looking just like he did the night before. I tried my best to keep a polite tone, but I was exhausted after a long day at work. I asked him if he needed something, mentioning that I was in a big hurry. If you are enjoying this tense story so far, do me a quick favor and smash that like button. The man didn't seem to care about my rush at all. Instead, he chuckled a bit and asked if I knew how the heating system worked in these apartments, claiming he was just too old to figure it out himself. I figured it was a harmless question, so I explained the simple controls. They only had a couple of basic buttons, so it was pretty hard to get wrong. He nodded along, but then asked if I could come over and show him, saying he had already tried what I suggested. I told him again that I really didn't have time, but he started getting pushy and a bit passive-aggressive, insisting it would only take 30 seconds and that he desperately needed my help. It was freezing cold outside in the middle of winter, and I started feeling guilty thinking about him freezing in his own home. So I finally gave in, thinking it would be the quickest way to get him to leave me alone. He led me down the outdoor walkway toward his apartment. The door was already wide open. But here is the crazy part that made me freeze right in my tracks. When I reached the doorway, I stopped dead. The entire place was completely empty. There was no furniture, no moving boxes, absolutely nothing. The walls had peeling paint, and the floor was filthy. It looked like nobody had lived there in months. To make things even worse, a horrible, rotting smell drifted out of the